handle their own basic nature in either constructive or destructive ways, and there are no guarantees. A person who is basically immature and unable to relate to anyone is obviously not going to relate well to anyone, no matter how well their chart fits someone else's chart. And two people who are mature and really care about each other can have a very good relationship with all kinds of conflicts between the charts. So the thing is exactly the same thing we say with an individual chart. You can't predict details of how the person will handle it. You can indicate the issues of what they're working on, what they have to struggle with, work out. You can say where the charts show natural mutual harmony and where they show conflict to be resolved. And then it's up to them. I have talked to astrologers who acknowledged they could not do horoscopes for spiritual people because all their rules, the traditional good and bad things, didn't work. They assume this is going to be bad, and this person isn't. What's the matter with that? You know, it's all right. I'm not having a problem with that. They're living on the positive side of it and not having a problem. So it does, in the end, always depend on how the individuals are handling the situation. When I compare two charts, I first do each chart, interpret each chart as an individual. I had people very unhappy about that. They call up and they want a chart comparison. I say, I have to do each one of you as an individual first. Till you understand yourself as an individual, how can you know how you can relate to anyone else? I will do each person as an individual and I'll compare them three. But I will not do just a comparison. So that's just my firm policy in terms of working with chart comparison. Conjunctions are the strongest aspects. And normally if a relationship is going to be enduring, there should be some conjunctions. But often those will be conjunctions to angles. Those can be very important. To the nodes of the moon, those are extremely important in relationships, as I feel just like the moon. Deep emotional bond at the unconscious level, kind of mutual dependency nurturance relationship. So if you just look at the planets, you may miss a lot. I've also found the east point axis and the vertex axis to be extremely important. And in fact, one actual research project carried out by Tom Shanks was with Neil Nicholson in San Diego. He took the couples collected by Goklan, where he got married couples when he was gathering some of his biographical data, and looked for the classical comparisons. And a study made years ago by Jung, he did find married couples tended to have more than chance conjunctions of ascendant, sun, moon, Venus. Some kind of combination of those factors, ascendant, sun, moon, Venus, which we would assume would be normal to expect that. Ascendant, personal, identity and action. Venus, our pleasure, capacity to enjoy someone else. Sun, our ability to love and be loved, and moon, our ability to nurture and be nurtured, to be connected on this deep emotional level. Jung did find significance in those, a significant number of those conjunctions, but he didn't know enough statistics to do very much with it. A later project carried out by a master's degree student at the University of Chicago for his master's degree thesis, he used modern statistics on Jung's data, as much as he could assemble of Jung's data, and found it was more significant than Jung had realized. That was an interesting study a few years back. But Tom Shanks, who also was working on his PhD from the University of Chicago, tested Goklan's couples and did not find these kinds of contacts to a significant degree. And the one factor that turned out to be most significant of all was the vertex axis. There were more contacts between the two charts involving the axis of vertex and anti-vertex than any other factor at the time, last time I talked to him about that study.
Vertex and east point are the same, right?
No, they're not the same. They're two different axes across the chart. East point opposite west point, the vertex opposite anti-vertex.
What's the symbol for vertex?
V for vertex and A, V, or upside down V on top of a V for anti-vertex.
So you just usually add a vertex in the grid and then figure the opposition to that.
Right. If you want to put them both in, you can, but they're always opposite each other, so you don't have to put in more than one. You can just use ascendant. You don't have to include descendant. If there's an aspect to one, there is also to the other, some kind of aspect. And all of these aspects we're using are symmetrical. So if one is conjunct, the other's opposite. If one is sextile, the other's trine, and so on. So if you do know how to calculate them, I do advise, if you're going to do chart comparisons, include the east point axis, east point, west point, and the vertex, anti-vertex axis in your comparisons, and the nodes. I found very strong contacts, emotional attractions with the nodes. And conjunctions do give this cohesive pulling together quality. No matter what the relationship, parent, child, husband, wife, sibling, when you have a lot of these conjunctions, there is a tendency for this strong clinging or hanging on or attaching and maintaining an attachment. Conversely, when there are a lot of oppositions and quincunxes, that's 180 degrees and 150 degrees, there tends to be a pulling apart, a separative tendency. Too many of those, and the relationship may have trouble being sustained. That doesn't mean you can't do it. You have to work harder at it. You have to want it more and be more conscious in working at it. The quincunx particularly can be very stimulating. It's a tendency to keep moving in new directions, opening up new doors, doing different things, changing what you're doing. And if you like living that kind of life, you can still have a basic core of stability, home or job or relationship, wherever you find your stability, and still have a lot of change going on in other areas.
So this is the vertex right on the north node.
That's powerful. And the anti-vertex is on the south node. That's a very powerful contact. Any one of these angle axes or nodes falling across another person's angles or nodes.
And then
Very strong attraction.
and then his east point is right on my ascendant.
Okay, then his west point's on your descendant. That's again a powerful contact. That's the kind of thing you find in enduring relationships where people are really attached to each other. I mentioned the other day, I had one couple that came in out of Hollywood, both real little prima donnas, in the Hollywood scene. They had been married and divorced 3 times. They couldn't live together. They both really centered in their own egos, and yet they couldn't ever break up either. They had 3 of those sets of angles, just as you've described 2 of them. They had 3 of those different angle interactions in their charts. And they kept pulling apart and coming together, because when you have those angle axes, you do have an opposition, but you also have conjunctions.
And then the third one is that my anti-vertex is right on his sun.
Okay, that's powerful too, but that doesn't give you the conjunction at the other end. But it's a very powerful contact, just the same.
Which is the one that gives the conjunction at the other end, the opposition?
Any axis across the chart.
Yeah.
Node axis, ascendant, descendant, ICMC, east point, west point, anti-vertex, vertex. Those are all axes across the chart which have something at both ends. So if one axis in one chart is on another axis in another chart, you've got a double statement. You've got a conjunction at both ends, and you've also got the opposition. One of my favorite examples of the nodes, and also of the natural difference between north node, south node, was a woman who was married to a man. They each had their own sun on the other's south node of the moon. Sun is your growth potential, or you're learning to do more than you've done before. And the south node is one of your lessons for this lifetime, where you are also growing, either voluntarily or being pushed into it. So they have this mutual interaction of sun on south node. And they struggled through a not very happy marriage for quite a few years, until they raised their one child, and then they got divorced. Within a few months after that, she met, and within weeks married, a man, and she and he had their moon on the other's north node, mutual again. Each one had the moon on the other person's north node. They had one of these absolutely incredible idyllic marriages, like made in heaven. They seemed like they were totally, almost like one person, just really simpatico on every level. And it lasted about 1 year, and he died. Now, when you've got a conjunction on one end, you've got an opposition from the other end, so the potential of the separation is still there. But they had an ecstatically happy 1 year anyway. After that, she thought about the whole situation, and she was really into astrology, psychic things, reincarnation, and the whole bit. And she realized she had not learned anything with that relationship with the first husband. They had just, really kind of fought it out all the way through. She went back, and with his consent, they remarried. And they managed to work out a viable relationship until he died some years later. She's since been widowed a third time. That's part of her pattern. But she went back and worked out a reasonably okay relationship the second time around. Both of them accepting each other, not trying to change each other, dominate each other. Both of them with more maturity. And they had a reasonably good marriage the second time around. Now, the South Node does not have to be negative, but it is something to learn. And you have a conjunction with someone else's South Node, or your South Node, there's some learning going on somewhere along the line. Similarly for Saturn conjunctions, or any aspects for that matter, but the conjunction is the important aspect. There's some growth and some learning, but it does not have to be bad. One of the most successful business partnerships I know of was two women, an older one and a younger one, who both had their own sun on the other person's Saturn. And the average astrology book tells you, like, horror story, like, run! They had a very successful business partnership. Neither one tried to dominate the other. They each had their own area of responsibility and power that they handled. They never had any problem as far as I know. So it depends on the person, the maturity of the person. The chart shows you the issues, but not the details of what they'll do with it. You say Sun and Saturn, you're talking about power, ego power and executive power, king and the executive. But if they both have their area of power, and they don't try to interfere with the other person's area of power, and they can compromise on the things that are mutually important, there doesn't have to be any kind of problem at all. Generally speaking, when you do compare two charts, you will find that the charts actually fit together reasonably well, and that if each person solves their own inner problems, they will be able to handle the relationship. Now, the problems are basically inside rather than outside, and if we face them and work them out on the inside, then we can handle the outside. But we always find someone with the same dilemma. So if we have an Aries Libra node, we are working on the freedom closeness dilemma. The Aries says my will, and the Libra says our will. I'll compromise. So we find someone else who has the same dilemma, and hopefully we work it out together. We learn how to compromise, when to compromise, and when to stand firm for our own rights, not be trampled. When to give and when to stand steady. So we do always find someone with the same dilemma. And if at different times in our life we are working on a different dilemma in our own nature, we all have all of them, it depends on how much, then we will find ourselves being attracted to different kinds of people who will be reflecting back the issues that are important to us at this point in time. So at one point in time we may be working on freedom closeness dilemma. At another time we're working on basically sheer power, or mastery issues, or really trying to understand that kind of thing, and trying to clarify goals and values, or trying to handle perfectionism, whatever the issues are. And we will be attracted to people who match our dilemma, who are working on the same issues, and we have a chance to see them like I'm looking in a mirror and say, oh, I recognize that in them. Maybe that's going on in me too. You better look at me.
There's something about that fellow that just doesn't fit.
We come in where we fit. We come to parents who express a part of us, but frequently life is a funhouse mirror. The idea of projection is they're just doing that part of you. They're overdoing it, running it in the ground, doing it to excess. And we have to have it, we're actually helped to recognize it by seeing it in excessive form. It becomes blatantly obvious if we have any intelligence to look at it. So at that point, we stop blaming anybody, and we say, okay, what are you here for? What can I learn from you? What is there about you that I need to look at in me? And in us, it may very well be that we have totally blocked that part of ourself that we see in this huge exaggerated form in them, and we need to do it in a small but and constructive way.
Pause while I write that down.
That's what I was saying, when I was blocking my Mars, I kept meeting these extreme Mars types. And now I rarely come in contact with them. But you can see this happening with other people. We had one of our seminars that we had here, one of our intensives, where we had 2 women present who both had Sun in Aries. One of them quite young, and she had a bachelor's degree, but she wasn't, extremely highly educated, but she was a very bright young woman. And the other one with a PhD in psychology, who ran a facility for schizophrenic people, was highly educated, a trained Jungian analyst, the whole thing, in her 60s. Supposedly by this time you should be mature and have reached wisdom and all that. Well, the older woman was absolutely bugged by the fact that the younger woman could do her Aries thing.
Look, man, you're bugging me. Why don't you split?
She could be loud and brash and impulsive and spontaneous and, and just she was a tremendously fun person, and she was just always shooting off her mouth and stirring things up, just in pure fun. She was not offensive at all to the rest of us. The rest of us thought she was great fun. But this other Aries woman was absolutely in a dither about this, because she couldn't let herself do these kinds of impulsive, young, spontaneous things. And she put this woman down unmercifully, attacked her and put her down. And
Does that bug you?
we were able to talk to her privately and reassure her, that it really was this woman's problem, the older woman's problem.
Not seminar.
Yeah, that was a very entertaining seminar.
When they say you have a happy marriage, say yes, isn't it wonderful? And I hope someday you will too.
Yeah, tell them maybe Dad, I'll do that.
My mother was once with a group of women, and they were all married, but it's a comparable kind of situation. And there was one of those bridge get-togethers, and everybody was chit-chatting, and the women got on the kick of talking about the problems of their husbands. So they went around the room, and everyone told what was wrong with her husband. And finally, they got to Martha, my mother, and they said, "Martha, you haven't said anything." And she said, "Well, I'm afraid I can't contribute to this conversation because my husband's perfect." That was the end of the conversation.
But I'm very happy.
So it just take it as a compliment that when they say you have a happy marriage, say, "Yes, I love my husband, and we do have a happy marriage, and of course I work at it."
Be happy.
Thank you.